Uh, Let us try this time to make our lecture through this video format in observance of the precautions that were made public by the health authorities in the country and even worldwide. We shall try to save our time by making our lecture in this interactive format so that we can continue our course from this distance learning mode. In this course, institutions and processes, we have had a lot of sessions, and as we are exploring how peace processes and institutions look like, we have been reviewing the way the UN is handling or addressing peace processes, and we have seen how the different and various organs of the UN are working in an integrated format. And then we moved from the UN to the UNESCO, and we saw how the UNESCO is in fact mainstreaming education as a tool of disseminating a culture of peace. And we have seen how it has impacted a discipline that came to be later on known as peace education, as a subdiscipline in peace and conflict studies. And in this session, we are going to further learn about how peace processes are in fact performed through an African perspective, through the continental bodies established in Africa, and how from their own perspective peace is being addressed. The title of this session is Peace and Security, an African Perspective, or from an AU perspective, in fact, African Union perspective. The first continental body that was established in Africa was the Organization of African Unity, the OAU, which was established in 1963, prioritizing unity among Africans, apart from resolving conflicts that might arise among them, being newly independent countries. The OAU, in fact, accepted the continent's pre-independence boundaries between the countries and endorsed the principle of sovereign equality of member states through the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of states, etc. That was the main principle along which the OAU has operated since its establishment in 1963. These principles, non-interference and the accepting the status quo of the African boundaries between states, these principles influenced the conduct of interstate relations, but in fact proved to be inadequate for the management of both inter and intrastate conflicts. That's to say, the principles adopted by the OAU fell short from addressing the conflicts that arose within and between African countries. Therefore, the OAU's primary mechanism, the OAU in fact established or developed its own mechanism for conflict resolution, which was called Commission of Mediation, Conciliation and Arbitration, which was established under Article 19 of the organization's charter, of the charter of the organization of the AU. Now, after the failure of the OAU to adequately address the conflicts between African states, and the leaders of the Organization of African Union recognized that reality, they opted to establish another body to take over from the OAU to better perform the management of inter and intra-state conflicts. That's how the AU came into existence. The African Union took over from the OAU with the adoption of the Constituent Act of the AU, the African Union, which came into force 2001, establishing the African Union in 2002 in Durban, South Africa. Now the AU has prioritized the need to promote peace and security and stability as prerequisites for the implementation of our development and integration agenda, which were in fact the aspirations of all Africans and African leaders since the decade of liberation of Africa in the 1960s. Now, we are going to explore how does the AU address the issue in which the OAU has failed. Now, the cornerstone of the AU, we can say, the concrete aspect of the Constituent Act, which is the charter in this area, and which marks a complete break from the OAU, is a principle of the right of the Union to intervention. In fact, this is a very important point differentiating the performance of the OAU and the AU, between the Organization of African Unity and the African Union, is this principle of the right of the African Union to intervene in the conflicts, be they within the African countries or between the African countries. This principle, in fact, was not existent in the charter of the AU at that time. The AU has the right to intervene in member states pursuant to a decision of the Assembly in respect of grave circumstances, namely war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. These are the cases which warrant the AU to intervene in African countries to address these grave areas. Now, the Constituent Act also reaffirms the right of the African Union to intervene in a state in respect of these war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. There are other values which the AU also has highlighted to be respected. Other values include respect for democratic principles, human rights, the rule of law, and good governance. These are, in fact, member states are called to abide by these principles. In fact, the Constituent Act of the African Union envisions early action for conflict prevention, containment, management, resolution, and elimination, including the deployment and sustenance of peacekeeping missions and thus promote initiatives that will preserve and strengthen peace and development in Africa. To further analyze the mechanisms developed by the African Union, we do see that the African Union Constituent Act